Welcome to the Learning Reinvented Podcast, brought to you by myself, Katie Godden.
And James Politillo from The Learning Effect. There are lots of learning podcasts out there, but we wanted to do something slightly different. In this episode, we're going to be delving into, are learning teams part of the solution, or sometimes are they actually part of the problem? So, Katie, this came from a bit of a reflection we've had around our learning teams bringing the right solutions into the challenges that they're maybe trying to take a business through. So do you want to expand a little bit more about that conversation and what led to it?
Yeah, so I think learning teams are obviously trying to do a great job, and I think everyone's intentions are well. However, there's lots of factors that make me believe sometimes we're potentially adding to the challenges rather than taking them away. We've got this sort of template, especially in regards to kind of digital learning, that you can implement a learning tech solution, normally normally a learning management platform, whatever that might look like, and then you put training on there and push people through it. That hasn't really evolved in a number of different years. Like, I know we've had conversations and you were at the start of that process that I wasn't quite working then. Um, and that hasn't changed over the years. Even when I started using learning platforms as part of my role, sort of 16 years ago, as much as they've developed slightly in regards to functionality and you can do a bit more on them, what we're putting through is essentially the same thing. It's just in a ever so slightly different format. And with the changes in technology, the changes in the way that we're working, it's got me questioning, are we actually doing something that's worthwhile, or are we potentially adding to the challenges of the workplace because we're not necessarily able to kind of work at pace, we're not able to get things out quickly, and keep up with how things are evolving, the need in which people need access to training and learning. And yeah, it's got me questioning. It'd be interesting to think, it'd be interesting to hear what you think as well.
I think there's a couple of sort of challenges wrapped in there. And I was with some change management professionals last week, and we were talking about this whole aspect of, are we really helping organizations to change or evolve, or is change management just something that doesn't really happen? And there was a conversation about it. It tends to be better if it's very close to the HR teams because change is ultimately about people and behavior. But the systemic things we have in the business are what stop us from changing and evolving. And I think the same with learning, that if we're not close to the business or close to the change that's happening, then a lot of the solutions we have, however well intentioned, as you indicated at the beginning, might just glance off the organization, or they're not quite solving the problems that need to be done. And it almost feels that what you're doing then is putting something in, and you intimated that it might be that that just adds to the problem because it's time spent on learning that isn't really the learning that's going to help people to get there, or people are maybe waiting for this silver bullet of some change training, new process training, upskilling, whatever we happen to call it, to come along to try and help bridge that gap that we need to get over. And when it comes across and it's late, or it's not relevant, or it's not personalized, or it's not contextualized to the issue, those things can cause massive amounts of frustration. And that's maybe where people are then filling the gap themselves. And I think the second point, what you said, triggered in me is, if all you've got is a certain set of tools, so if you think training is what you offer, or digital learning is what you do, or you're there and you're a learning designer, or whatever you happen to be, if that's the hat you'll wear, you'll always pick up and get the same type of solution. Doesn't matter if that solution's needed or not. And the bravery to say, we can't play a part in this, or what we're doing now is actually really unhelpful, isn't sort of human nature, because people want to feel useful, included, valued. And to actually pull back, pull the rug on what you're doing, challenging yourself, doing that openly in lots of organizations. The organizations themselves and people as individuals don't have that collaborative or self-aware culture to be able to do that and it be seen as a positive, constructive thing, not just weakness.
Yeah, and I think some of it comes from the need to record everything as well. I understand it from an insurance, a health and safety, um, like regulation, requirement. I understand that you need to obviously have that recorded and to be able to prove relevant completions, etc. However, when it comes to the skills that are used to help us with our jobs, to get us through those periods of change, to upskill us, those things, do we need to record it? Can we do it differently and still do it really well? Because I think partly we're restricting ourselves through things like recording, but then potentially in bigger corporations, you might have it where you've got things like IT that are restrictive, so like what are the capabilities with that? Are we restricted down? Um, you might have processes that sit within HR that might restrict you to be able to do things and require you to have certain records and things like that. So I think there are some elements that restrict us, but are we pushing enough boundaries and challenging back on those things, or are we just going along with everything because that's how we've always done it? And I think sometimes that's, especially in learning, where we get stuck and where we fail to see any sort of innovation because we're just plodding along. You might implement a new learning system that's updated compared to the one that you implemented 10 years ago, but is it actually doing anything different or does it just look shiny and new? That's the question. And I think there's a real opportunity to really innovate the way that we do learning and change it up, and I don't mean just creating online courses or maybe turning that into a video, or I don't mean it like that. Does it need to be online? Is it something where you have a drop-in session and you chat to people about it? Or, like, should we see learning as something different to enable us to be able to be more innovative and to be able to actually get more out of it and be able to show the impact that we're having? Does that kind of expand what the learning team or the functionality of the learning team? Because, all of these different bits of information that we're providing to people are a form of learning, but we don't necessarily call them that, and that would help us. It's not just going in and doing an online course, it's the communications, it's that understanding why, it's that story behind it that have the bigger impact and provide you with that level of engagement. But I think we sort of lack in that in certain instances, and that's where we're not kind of getting the most out of it, and potentially just adding more into the mix that's not necessarily required. Like you said, it doesn't hit the spot, it's not fulfilling its purpose.
And I think the visibility of learning sometimes is a real weirdity where learning wants to be visible because it's how it shows its value. Whereas actually, when learning is invisible, that's where it really shows its and adds value. So, an induction that disrupts you and takes you away and isn't in the flow of your job, that doesn't get you performing quickly, is visible. One that's embedded into your role probably doesn't feel that it is visible that the learning team's doing anything, but that can take far more work, far more energy, and far more effort. I was noticed on LinkedIn the other day an organization I used to work for, and they regularly have management development programs. They pull people out, they push them through these programs, and it creates a real elitist view of the haves and have nots. And I've always questioned that approach as to does that really help people make the transition that that program thinks it does? Do those people really get what they need at the right time, or sheep dipping people through those programs? Sometimes you can get it really right, but so often those programs are forced content on people because we believe that that's right for them. and it's going to take them on that journey and doesn't assume where they're coming from or what they need individually. And you can try and put individuality into that. So I'm not sure that we always need those things. And if you went into a learning team and went, oh, what should I build? Should I build an induction? Should I build a development program? Should I put some online courses? I think when you go in with a blank sheet of paper, if you're lucky enough to ever do that, and I've done that a few times in my career, I've not built the same thing twice or even anything that looks like the same thing because the problems and contexts are very different. Are those things always the right things? Probably not either, because you don't always get it right. But being able to iterate and look at it and think about where you're adding value to the business and not necessarily think about your profile, but linking back to the business metrics. So a learning team that's valued by your business because you're helping them perform, not is championing its own self as a function, but is there as an aid to the rest of the business.
Yeah, I think that comes down to, do we ask the right questions? When we're going into meetings with other departments that require learning, and I don't mean just I want to put some people, like you said, on a management course, or what have you got in your shopping basket that I can purchase from you on my cost center. I don't mean that. I think when you're going in and actually there's a real need and desire to have learning, and it's not just for learning's sake. There is a genuine challenge, whether that's you need to improve sales, you need to improve better understanding of product knowledge, or it's a process, whatever that challenge might be that's then impacting the bigger business. That's where we need to then obviously bring in training at the right point to help improve those things. And that training can look however it looks, but are we asking the right questions when we're going in and meeting those people to get the most out of that and do it at pace and get the right approach in order to be able to do that? It's something that I don't see very often. I think we start at sort of solution level. So we go in and we listen and we understand what perhaps the process is at the moment, and we can perhaps make the same in a different way. But is that part of the challenge anyway? Is that why it's not right? What are we actually like? We need to take it up a level. What are we actually here to do? What's the objective? What do we need to get more out of, or whatever that might be? I think we start too low down, and we don't advise and we don't consult necessarily. We listen and we do. And I think that's where we need to perhaps change as learning professionals, to actually go in the room, be the expert in the room, and then understand and be able to challenge back, and obviously have that innovation and be able to bring the ideas as well.
And I think you're part of a bigger thing than learning always. And it's that part where lots of people aren't comfortable being part of a bigger thing than learning in learning. So they look for what they're comfortable with. So that suits them. Also, lots of businesses don't really understand what learning's there to do. All they've got is the reference of the past. So inductions or courses or a solution that can solve this problem. And so even when you go in and have those conversations, you'll often find that there's a preconceived idea as to what learning will be. So I just here to ask what courses I want for my people. I'm here to do those different things. And that comes back to, is learning there to help deliver training? Is it there to help enhance performance? And performance is not just people, it's the whole ecosystem of what goes on, the systems people are using, the processes, how they're targeted. And that's the wider piece that learning is part of. And again, depending on how it's cut organizationally, that can be owned by no one, lots of different people, by a few different people. It can be cohesive, it can be very disparate. But as a learning professional, you've got to go in there and almost be like the glue between those things. So between the people, the IT, the systems, the targets, the processes, the customer requirements, the business goals and growth strategy, how we make money. All of those things impact upon what your people need to be doing to survive, because you can go into one business and it's a low touch, frictionless customer environment, or you can go into another and it's a high touch customer environment. They're completely different solutions you will end up to, not just on training on customer service, but on processes, management, leadership, feedback, all of those. So the whole thing becomes very different just based on that contextual thing, which can look from the first point of we're providing service to customers. It's completely different. And that's the same for any other aspect of business, that you need to be understanding how those things work together. You're almost that architect of how do we create the perfect performance environment for the business where people can add to that. And that is more challenged where there are more opportunities for automation of different things, whether that's AI or other automation, outsourcing various different resourcing models. So it's not a black and white, you can come in and just deliver these 5 things, or this is what your learning team should look like.
No, and I think this is sometimes where suppliers don't help as well in learning, especially in sort of the learning tech market, because they see as one retailer is the same as any other retailer. But like you said, you can have very different experiences depending on what you're selling, what that interaction looks like. So it isn't one size fits all, and that's what's something that really irritates me. Is from a supplier point of view, do they actually understand the requirements of their customers? Um, you know, or are they just selling in to these teams that are perhaps a bit naive to buying things, or new to it, whatever that might be? Or are they listening to kind of what they're saying in regards to, well, we've sold into this person's using it, this person's using it, etc., etc. Like, just because it's the same industry doesn't mean that you're going to do it the same way over and over again. It's not that cookie cutter approach, and I think everyone is trying to pigeonhole people, and it's a real shame. I think, and it's something that I've seen more and more of, and that's why I kind of wanted to do a podcast on this topic, because um I sometimes see that we're providing more of a challenge rather than a solution and a great outcome, because we're adding to it and we're overcomplicating something that should be fairly simple. We need to be better at something, so we need to provide some learning in whatever shape that looks like, in order for people to understand what they need to be doing and how they can improve. That's essentially what we need to do. But I think that we're over engineering some of those bits, and it is a real shame. And I'd like the learning industry to kind of revolutionize itself and become more innovative, and take a step away and actually really understand businesses, and really understand how we should be delivering learning, and not one size fits all.
And I think, there's loads of points you made there really relevant, back to the things you're told as a kid. If your friend jumped in front of a bus, would you do it? No, but it seems, we just follow because that's what the rest of the industry are doing, or that's what your peers are doing, or that's what's expected. And being really thoughtful about what you do as a learning professional is where you need to start. And I think the second point is being brave, being from the crowd, to be different, to say no, to close things down and shut things down, to take time to truly evaluate the value you're adding into places. Is the time you're getting for people to spend on learning time well spent? Are the problems that are more pressing in the business that aren't articulated or identified as being able to be solved by the learning solution stick, or whatever you want to smack it with, or where you can find a course in your LMS or on your content library that you bought from a supplier? So getting away from all of those easy, relatively lazy options and standing back and being brave, getting alongside your business, not being afraid to say no, being thoughtful, being experimental and being collaborative, and then being data driven. And if you can get those things driven into how you operate, I think that's a good measure for learning people, is how much of your day is spent doing those things and how much of your day is spent doing other things, of creating things, solving solutions, or serving people. And there needs to be a balance where you are far more in that front line to make sure that you're delivering what you're doing. And even if you think you're delivering great stuff, that needs to be woven into what you're doing, because the world is moving, and stuff that you were doing that was great 6 months ago will change, will evolve, will become obsolete. And you need to be the people who are calling it out before you become redundant and irrelevant to your business or to the industry.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. I think it'd be really interesting to find out if people agree with us or not on this one. Are we causing more challenges in the learning space, or are we providing the solutions? And, what are your opinions? What are your thoughts on it?
Absolutely. Would love to hear everyone's thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Learning Reinvented podcast. We hope you enjoyed it. If you've not already done so, please follow our podcast. And if the learning effect can help you and your organisation, please do get in touch. You can find both James and Katie on LinkedIn, and our contact details are in the show notes below.